You didn't arrive here by accident. You came because something inside you has been quietly, persistently demanding more than the life that was handed to you, more than the ceiling they measured you for, more than the version of yourself they decided was acceptable, more than the smallness they tried to convince you was your natural size. They wanted a monster. They pushed until something in you finally answered that call. And now you are standing at the edge of what you are becoming, trying to decide whether to step forward or retreat back into the version of you that was easier for them to manage. Do not retreat. What they call the monster is simply a person who stopped apologizing for wanting more than they were given. What they call dangerous is simply a person who stopped pretending that the limitations they imposed were real. What they call difficult is simply a person who finally refused to make themselves smaller so that smaller people could feel comfortable around them. The fear in their eyes when they look at you now is not fear of something evil. It is fear of something free, and free people. People who cannot be managed through approval or controlled through the withdrawal of acceptance are the most threatening thing that a world built on compliance has ever encountered. This is not a speech about rage. Rage is temporary, unfocused, and ultimately serves the people who provoked it more than it serves you. This is a conversation about the cold, precise, and utterly unbreakable decision to become exactly what they feared you are capable of becoming. Not to destroy them, not to settle scores, but because you have earned it, because you survived things that would have ended lesser people, because you are still here, still standing, still moving forward when every calculation they made about your limits turned out to be wrong. First, they built this, they don't get to name it. There is a particular cruelty in being told that the strength you developed to survive what someone else put you through is the problem, that the hardness you grew to protect yourself from environments designed to break you is character flaw, that the fire you kept burning through seasons of being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated is something you should extinguish to make the people who dismissed you more comfortable. They put you in a position that required you to become harder. They created the conditions that burned away the parts of you that could afford to be soft, and now, standing in front of what they produced, they have the audacity to call it monstrous, as though they had nothing to do with the forging, as though the pressure they applied, the dismissals they issued, the times they looked at your potential and deliberately looked away, as though none of that left a mark, as though you simply chose, one afternoon, to become someone they could not control. You didn't choose this. It was drawn out of you through years of being told you were not enough, not ready, not the right kind of person for the things you wanted. Every time they pushed you down and you got back up, something calcified. Every time they underestimated you and you performed anyway, something sharpened. Every time they tried to define your ceiling and you quietly, consistently refused to live inside their definition, something in you became more certain of itself, more precise, more unmovable. That is not a monster. That is a person who survived their own forging. And the only thing monstrous about it is that they did not account for the possibility that you would not only survive but emerge from it carrying the exact qualities they tried to prevent you from developing. They wanted you tamed. They built a lion. That is not your problem to apologize for. Second, the world does not reward who you were. It responds to who you became. Here is something nobody tells you when you are in the middle of the hardest seasons of your life. The difficulty is not a detour from your development. It is the development, the periods that felt like they were costing you everything. Your confidence, your peace, your faith that things could work out, were the periods that were installing the exact architecture you would later need to hold what was coming. You are being built in the dark, without being shown the blueprint. Without anyone acknowledging what was happening or what it was producing. Most people quit during the installation. The process is painful, disorienting, and impossible to understand from the inside. They cannot see the purpose in the difficulty. So they conclude there is none. They decide that the pain is simply punishment, that the struggle is simply bad luck, that the universe is indifferent or actively hostile to what they want. And so they stop. They retreat to a smaller version of what they were. Attempting, they settle. They fit themselves back into the mold that others measured them for, and they call it wisdom. You did not stop. That is the only thing that separates where you are now from where they expected you to end up. Not talent, not luck, not circumstance. The single, repeated, sometimes barely sustained decision to keep going when stopping would have been completely understandable, when stopping would have been forgiven, when stopping would have looked, from the outside, like the reasonable and rational response to an unreasonable situation. You kept going, and the world, which does not respond to effort or intention or good character but responds with ruthless consistency to demonstrate a capacity, is now adjusting its understanding of you. It is recalibrating around the new information that you are still here, that you are not the person it initially calculated you to be, that its original assessment of your limits was not accurate. That kind of recalibration does not happen for the people who quit. It only happens for the ones who stayed long enough to prove the original calculation wrong. The world is doing that recalibration right now. Let it. Third, stop explaining yourself to people who are never going to understand. There is a particular trap that strong people fall into with unusual frequency. The trap of needing the people who doubted them to acknowledge the doubt was wrong. The need to be understood by the exact people who misunderstood them, to receive validation from the specific sources that withheld it during the hardest seasons. It is an understandable need. It is also one of the most effective ways to give those people continued leverage over your state of mind and your sense of progress. The people who looked at you and saw a limitation were not seeing the truth about you. They were seeing the limits of their own perception, the ceiling of their own imagination, the edges of what they themselves believed was possible. Their assessment of you was never really about you at all. It was a projection of what they understood about themselves and the world, and what they understood was not large enough to contain what you were becoming. That is a statement about their capacity, not yours. You do not need them to revise their assessment. You do not need them to publicly acknowledge that they were wrong. You do not need the apology, the recognition, or the moment where they look at you with the respect they withheld and finally give you what you were reaching for during the years they looked away. That moment, even if it came, would not fill what you were hoping it would fill, because what you actually wanted was never their specific approval. What you wanted was confirmation that the effort was worth it, that the struggle produced something real, that who you are becoming is genuinely different from who they told you that you were. You already have that confirmation. You have it in the fact that you are still here. You have it in every room you have walked into that you would not have been capable of entering 3 years ago. You have it in the problems you now solve effortlessly that once seemed impossible. You have it in the quiet, private knowledge that you survived, a process that most people opt out of, and that you came through it carrying something they cannot take from you because they did not give it to you in the first place. Stop explaining yourself to an audience that was never qualified to evaluate what you were doing. Move. Let the movement be the only explanation you offer. Fourth, the difference between a monster and a force. There is an important distinction that this conversation requires, and it is worth stating precisely because getting it wrong produces a version of strength that destroys the person wielding it as efficiently as it destroys everything around them. A monster reacts, a force decides. A monster is governed by what was done to it. It moves through the world driven by old wounds, old anger, the accumulated weight of every injustice and dismissal and betrayal it has ever experienced. It is powerful, but the power is not its own. The power belongs, in a very real sense, to the people who caused the original pain, because they are still, through the monster's reactions, directing its behavior from a distance. Every time the monster acts out of rage at what was done to it, the people who did it still win. They are still in the room. They are still pulling strings. A force is different. A force has processed what happened to it and extracted the fuel without remaining enslaved to the source. It uses the experience without being defined by it. It moves with precision rather than rage, with strategy rather than reaction, with a clarity about what it is building rather than a fixation on what was taken. A force is not soft. It is cold in the way that genuine, disciplined strength is always cold, not indifferent, but unswayed, not unfeeling, but ungoverned by feeling in the moments when clarity is required. The goal is not to become someone who burns everything down out of accumulated pain. Anyone can do that. The goal is to become someone so disciplined, so precisely directed, so completely in command of the energy that was forged in difficulty, that the people who created the conditions for that forging look at what they produced and understand, with complete clarity, that they miscalculated, not with rage, with results, not with noise, with the particular silence of someone who no longer needs to explain anything, because what they have built speaks with a volume that words could never reach. That is the kind of monster worth becoming, not the one they feared in the wrong sense, but the one they underestimated in the right sense, the one that was quietly, patiently, methodically becoming something they never accounted for. Fifth, fear is not the goal. Irrelevance is the ultimate power move. Most people, when they imagine the moment of vindication, the moment where the people who doubted them finally have to reckon with what they became, imagine it as a moment of fear. They want the doubters to look at them and feel afraid of what they see, to recognize the power they dismissed, and feel the specific discomfort of having been catastrophically wrong about someone. That image is understandable. It is also, in the architecture of genuine power, a lesser version of what is actually available to you. Fear requires continued awareness. For someone to fear you, they must still be thinking about you. They must be carrying you in their mind, tracking your movements, adjusting their behavior in response to your presence. Fear, in this sense, gives you a version of their attention, but attention is not irrelevance, and irrelevance, the specific condition in which they have become so peripheral to the life you are building that you genuinely do not register their existence, is more complete than any fear you could produce. The most powerful thing you can do with the people who try to limit you is not to make them afraid of what you became. It is to build something so absorbing, so genuinely demanding of your full capacity, that they cease to exist as a reference point in your internal landscape, not because you suppressed the memory of what they did, but because what you are building requires all of you, and all of you is better things to do than maintain. Awareness of people who are no longer relevant to the direction you're moving in. This is the final evolution of what they accidentally produced when they tried to break you. They were aiming for a person so damaged by what they did that the damage would be permanent. What they created instead was a person so focused on what they are building that the space those people once occupied in your psychology has been taken over by something far more important: your own vision, your own momentum, your own increasingly undeniable proof that you were never what they said you were. They wanted a monster. What they got was someone who outgrew the need for their opinion entirely. That is the version of this story that ends in your favor. Sixth, the mountain was never about reaching the top. You came up this mountain looking for something, permission, maybe, confirmation, the specific feeling of having arrived somewhere that justified everything the climb cost you. And there is something worth examining in that, in the assumption that what you have been moving toward is a destination, a fixed point, a place where you finally get to stop climbing and simply exist in the recognition of what you survived to reach. That is not how this works. The mountain was never a destination. The mountain was the method. The climbing was not preparation for some future moment. When the real thing would begin, the climbing was the thing. Every step that cost you something. Every moment where stopping would have been easier than continuing. Every decision to get back up after being knocked down. Those were not the prelude to your life. They were the substance of it. The person who reaches the top of one mountain and stops climbing has misunderstood what mountains are for. The top is not the reward. The view from the top is the reward, the expanded perspective that is. Only available to someone who did the climbing, who earned the elevation, who can now see the landscape with a clarity that is impossible from the ground. And from that elevation, the next mountain is already visible, not as a threat, as an invitation, as evidence that what you are capable of is not limited by what you have already done, as proof that the process that produced who you are now is still running, still building, still forging someone who is not finished and knows it. They wanted you to stop at the bottom. They wanted you convinced that the mountain was not for people like you, that the climb was more than you could manage, that the top was reserved for someone other than who you were. Everything you have done since you stopped believing that is the answer to every limitation they ever tried to place on you. And the answer is not finished yet. Seventh, this is what they built. Own it completely. You are different from who you were, not slightly adjusted, not modestly improved. Fundamentally different, in ways that are visible to everyone who knew the earlier version of you and cannot quite name what changed. The posture is different. The pace is different. The way you enter rooms, the way you hold silence, the way you respond to pressure that would have previously destabilized you. All of it communicates something that was not there before. What was not there before was this: the unshakable internal knowledge that you survived your own worst season and came through it carrying something real, not a performance of strength, not a constructed confidence assembled from self-help frameworks, the actual, weight-tested, pressure-proven thing, a knowledge of your own capacity that can only be built from the inside, through experience. And that cannot be given to you by any external source, no matter how generous or well-intentioned. They cannot take it back. That is the part they did not account for. They can revise their opinion of you. They can try to rewrite the narrative. They can pretend that what they did was not what it was. None of that changes what you know about yourself from the inside. None of that dismantles the architecture that was built through the process they initiated when they decided to test what you were made of. They ran the test. The test produced a result they were not expecting. And the result is you, standing where you are standing. Knowing what you know, capable of what you are now capable of, and entirely done apologizing for any of it. Own this completely, not with performance, not with the need to announce it to anyone, not with the specific kind of loudness that is actually insecurity wearing the mask of confidence. Own it with the quiet, settled, immovable certainty of someone who has already done the reckoning, who has already sat with the hardest truths about the journey and made peace with every part of it. The parts that cost them, the parts they are proud of, the parts that will never fully stop hurting, and the parts that turned out to be the most important thing that ever happened to them. They wanted a monster. What they got was something they did not have a word for, something harder than what they tried to break, something more precise than what they were attempting to disrupt, something that took everything they threw at it and converted it, slowly and without their permission, into exactly the kind of power they were trying to prevent. You are the thing they built when they tried to destroy you. And you are just getting started. Eighth, what you do with it from here is everything. There is a version of this story that ends badly, not because of anything that was done to you. You already survived that. It ends badly because of what some people do with the strength they developed in response to what was done to them. They mistake the hardness for a destination. They believe that becoming unbreakable means becoming closed, that the armor is supposed to stay on permanently, that the coldness that protected them during the worst seasons is who they are supposed to be from this point forward. In every situation, with every person, without exception, that version of the story turns you into the thing they called you, rather than the thing they accidentally built. It takes the legitimate, earned, completely justified strength you developed and converts it into a wall that keeps everything out. Not just the people who try to harm you, but the things worth having, the people worth trusting, the experiences that require some degree of openness to enter your life at all. It takes what could have been your greatest asset and makes it your primary limitation. The discipline required in this stage is different from the discipline that got you here. Getting here required the discipline to keep moving under conditions designed to stop you. What is required now is the discipline to choose, with full awareness, what the strength is for, not to protect you from life, to equip you for it, not to keep people out, to ensure that the people who get in have genuinely earned the access, not to eliminate vulnerability, to make sure that the vulnerability you carry is in service of something real rather than something that will cost you the same way the old wounds did. You earned the right to be selective, to move slowly, to require more from the situations and people you invest in than you required before, because you now understand at a level that theory could never have taught you what it costs when you invest in the wrong things. That wisdom is not coldness, it is precision, and precision applied to how you spend your energy, your trust, and your time is the final form of what you became through everything you survived. They wanted a monster. What they actually produced was someone who knows exactly what they are worth, exactly what they will and will not accept, exactly where they are going, and exactly what it will take to get there. Someone who has been through enough to know the difference between the situations worth entering and the ones worth walking past. Someone whose strength is not the uncontrolled output of accumulated pain, but the precisely directed output of accumulated wisdom. That person does not need to prove anything to the people who doubted them. That person does not need to perform their strength for an audience of people who are never going to understand it. That person simply moves, steadily, deliberately, with the kind of quiet certainty that only comes from having been tested at a level most people are never tested at and having come through it with something that cannot be taken back. That is you, not the person they tried to make you, not the person they thought they were producing when they applied the pressure. Not even the person you thought you were during the hardest parts of the process. The person you actually are, forged, precise, purposeful, and genuinely unstoppable in the specific way that only people who have already survived their worst season can be. They wanted a monster. They have no idea what they actually built, and neither do you yet, because you are not finished. Keep moving, keep building, keep becoming. The people who tried to define your ceiling are watching something they do not have the language for. Give them more to watch. You owe them nothing else, not even close.